The letter arrived on a Thursday, tucked between a water bill and a coupon flyer, like it didn't know what it was about to do to a man's life. Elliot Voss almost didn't open it. He was standing at the kitchen counter in his work clothes, still smelling like machine oil and cold concrete. And his daughter Becca was at the table behind him, doing her homework, with the focused silence of a 9-year-old, who understood, without anyone telling her, that Thursday evenings were not for noise. The return address said Callaway Industrial Group. Elliot set down the water bill. He read the letter once, then folded it exactly the way it had come and put it back in the envelope. "Dad?" Becca said, without looking up. "Everything's fine," he said. "You want mac and cheese or eggs tonight?" "Eggs," she said. He made the eggs. He didn't think about the letter again until she was in bed and the house was quiet enough that there was nothing else to think about. Callaway Industrial Group was the largest private manufacturing operation in the state of Ohio, and for 11 years, Elliot had been their senior mechanical systems engineer. He had started in the maintenance bay, same as everyone else, tightening bolts and reading manuals in the break room on his lunch hour. By the time he was 32, he had redesigned the lubrication cycle on 3 of their primary press lines and saved the company an estimated $400,000 in annual maintenance costs. His name was on a plaque in the lobby. He'd shaken hands with the regional VP at a dinner he'd felt underdressed for. Then his wife, Dana, got sick. It wasn't the kind of sick that gave you time to make arrangements. It moved fast. Elliot took leave in chunks and then all at once, and when Dana passed in October of the year Becca turned 5, he came back to work 3 weeks later because he didn't know what else to do with his hands. He was different after that. Anyone could see it. He still did the work and did it well, but the version of Elliot who had stayed late to optimize output ratios and send follow-up emails with attached schematics, that version had gone somewhere quieter. He took fewer meetings. He stopped putting his name forward for anything. He was there to do the job, pick up Becca, and get home before it got dark. That, apparently, was the problem. The letter said he was being repositioned. His role was being restructured into a supervisory-only capacity with adjusted compensation. The engineering decisions going forward would go through a new technical team they were bringing in. Consultants from a firm called Meridian Solutions, specialists in what the letter called next-generation industrial diagnostics. Elliot sat with that for a long time in his kitchen. He wasn't angry, exactly. He was something quieter than angry and harder to shake. He found out about the Halverson job through Eddie Rusk, a retired millwright who drank coffee at the same diner Elliot did on Saturday mornings. Eddie mentioned it the way he mentioned everything, sideways, while looking at his cup. "You hear about that textile plant up on Route 9? Halverson family's been running it 60 years. Something went wrong with one of their main looms a couple months back. Whole line's been down since. Brought in 2 outfits already, couldn't fix it." Elliot looked up. What kind of loom? Old Draper shuttle loom. 1960s, maybe. Thing's been running since before the owner's father was born. "What's wrong with it?" Eddie shrugged. "That's the thing. The first company said it was the timing mechanism. Quoted them $40,000 to rebuild it. Second company said the whole loom was shot, told them to scrap it and modernize the whole floor. $250,000, easy." Elliot drank his coffee. "But it's still sitting there. Owner won't let them touch it," Eddie said. "Her grandfather built it. Her father ran it for 40 years. She'd rather shut the whole line down than scrap it." He paused. "Sounds like something you might have an idea about." Vivian Halverson met him at the front entrance of the plant on a gray Tuesday morning and did not look like a woman who needed saving. She was in her mid-50s, sharp-eyed, with the kind of posture that came from decades of walking factory floors and not apologizing for it. She shook Elliot's hand like she was testing something. "You're the one Eddie Rusk sent," she said. It wasn't a question. "I am. You worked at Callaway 11 years. She studied him for a moment. "I called Callaway last year. They sent me a team with laptops and diagnostic software I've never heard of. They spent 2 days running tests and told me my grandfather's loom had a catastrophic timing failure, and the only responsible course of action was full replacement. She tilted her head slightly. Then I called Meridian Solutions. What did they say? They agreed with Callaway. Sent me a 30-page report with a lot of charts and a number at the bottom that made my accountant go pale. She gestured for him to follow her inside. So you understand why I'm not especially optimistic about a third opinion. That's fair, Elliot said. The floor smelled like oil and old wood, and something faintly floral that was probably the fiber from decades of textile work soaked into the walls. The Draper loom sat at the far end of the bay like a piece of furniture someone had forgotten to move. It was large and angular and very obviously mechanical. No digital panels, no sensor arrays, nothing that needed a software license to understand. It was a machine that expected to be understood on its own terms. Elliot walked up to it slowly. He didn't touch it yet. He stood back and looked at it the way you look at something you're trying to hear. "Can you run it?" he asked. Vivian crossed her arms. "It'll run for about 40 seconds before it starts throwing the shuttle erratically. Then I shut it down before it damages the remaining components." "Do that," he said. "I want to watch." She signaled to a man near the wall, and the loom started. Elliot watched. He was very still. He watched the shuttle move through its arc, watched the timing of the beater, watched the rhythm of the harness frames rising and falling. He watched the exact moment, around the 30-second mark, when something in that rhythm went microscopically wrong. Not catastrophically, not like a machine that was broken, more like a machine that was tired, that had learned a slightly bad habit it couldn't unlearn. "Stop it," he said quietly. The loom went still. He walked around to the left side and crouched down near the treadle mechanism, pulling a small flashlight from his jacket pocket. He was quiet for almost 2 full minutes. Vivian stood behind him and said nothing, which he appreciated. When he stood up, he said, "The timing gear hasn't failed. The primary shaft bearing on the left crankbox has maybe 20% wear beyond spec. It's causing a micro lag in the shuttle timing, about 4 milliseconds off. Not enough to show up on a diagnostic sweep if you don't know what to look for, but enough that after a few seconds of operation, it throws the synchronization off enough to make the shuttle pattern erratic." Vivian was very still. Both companies ran full diagnostic protocols. "I know. The diagnostic software they use is calibrated for deviation thresholds on modern looms. On a machine this old, the tolerance windows are different. The software flags the symptoms, not the source. It sees erratic shuttle behavior and points at the timing mechanism, because that's the most common cause in contemporary models. It's not wrong about what it sees. It's wrong about what it means." She looked at him for a long moment. "Can you fix it?" "The bearing's not proprietary. I'll need to measure the shaft diameter to match the spec. It'll be a non-standard size, but it's not exotic. I can source it." He paused. 2 days of work. Maybe 3 if the crankbox housing needs any attention when I get in there. "How much?" he told her. She blinked once, very quickly, in a way that meant she was doing math, and the math was surprising her. "That's considerably less than the other estimates," she said carefully. "The other estimates were for replacing things that don't need replacing." He came back the next morning with his tools and his daughter. That part wasn't planned. Becca's school had a teacher development day, and the woman who usually watched her was sick, and Elliot had run out of options by 7 a.m. He brought her with a bag full of books and snacks and a strict set of instructions about staying on the bench near the office and not touching anything. Vivian saw her when they arrived and said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "How old?" "9, Elliot said. Vivian nodded slowly. "My father used to bring me here when I was 9. I sat on that same bench." She looked at Becca. "You like machines?" Becca considered this seriously. "I like when they work." Vivian almost smiled. The work was painstaking in the way that good mechanical work always is. Not difficult, exactly, but demanding in the way that requires a kind of sustained attention that most people can't maintain for long. Elliot worked methodically. He opened the crankbox housing, confirmed the bearing wear, documented everything before he touched it, and then began the careful process of removal. The bearing was original. It had been running in that crankbox for somewhere north of 50 years. When he finally got it out and held it in his palm under the light, he spent a moment just looking at it. Something that had been doing its job that long deserved at least that much. The replacement took most of the first day to source, a specialty supplier in Pennsylvania who had to pull it from older stock, and arrived by courier the second morning. Elliot spent that afternoon fitting it, aligning the shaft, checking the tolerances by hand with a set of calipers that he'd had since his first job out of trade school. On the third morning, he said it was ready. Vivian walked the floor slowly, stopping at the loom. She looked at Elliot. He nodded. She signaled the operator. The loom started. The shuttle moved through its arc with the clean, metronomic certainty of something that had just remembered what it was supposed to be doing. 40 seconds passed. A minute. The rhythm held. The synchronization was perfect. Vivian stood with her arms at her sides and watched her grandfather's loom run, and she was quiet for long enough that Elliot looked away to give her the moment. From the bench near the office, Becca had put down her book. She was watching the loom with wide, attentive eyes. The way she watched things when she was trying to understand how they worked, she had her mother's eyes. Elliot had never been able to decide if that made him glad or if it made everything harder. Both, probably. Always both. The story might have ended there, and it would have been enough. A fair day's work, a machine restored, a woman who got to keep something she loved. Elliot would have driven home, made dinner, helped Becca with her homework, and the whole thing would have settled into the category of things that went right for once. But Vivian Halverson was not a woman who let things end quietly when they didn't have to. She called Elliot 2 weeks later and asked if he could come in. Not for a rep, for a conversation. He sat across from her in the plant office, a small room with wood paneling and a window that looked out over the floor, and she set a folder on the desk between them. "I talked to 6 people in this county who run manufacturing operations," she said. "Old equipment, mostly. Things that the big service companies don't want to deal with anymore because there's no software interface, and they can't run their standard protocols on it." She paused. "Every one of them has at least one machine that's been either red-tagged or quoted for replacement in the last 3 years. 2 of them went ahead and spent the money. The rest are running at reduced capacity or shut down entirely." Elliot looked at the folder. He didn't open it. "I'm not a businessman," he said. "I know that." Vivian leaned back. "You're a mechanic. A real one. Not a parts swapper, not a software reader. Someone who can actually diagnose a machine." She nodded toward the folder. "That's 6 names, 6 phone numbers, 6 people who need exactly what you did for me and have been told it doesn't exist anymore." He was quiet. "What you did here," she said, "it took you 3 days. The other companies spent a combined 8 days here and still got it wrong. And what they were going to charge me." She stopped. "The math is not complicated, Elliot." He looked out the window at the floor. The loom was running. He could see it from here, the shuttle moving back and forth in its clean, steady arc, and he found that he couldn't stop looking at it. "I'd need a shop," he said finally. "There's an empty bay at the east end of this building," Vivian said. "It's been sitting empty for 4 years. We can talk about terms." He didn't tell Becca right away. He wanted to be sure first. Sure it was real. Sure the idea held up under a few days of honest examination. Sure he wasn't making a decision out of something that looked like hope but was actually just exhaustion. He thought about Dana, not in a superstitious way, not asking for signs. Just the way he always thought about her when something changed, holding the image of her in his mind and letting it tell him what it told him. What it told him was that she would have made a spreadsheet. She would have had him list out every risk and then argued with him about which ones he was overstating and which ones he was ignoring. She would have made the conversation feel like the beginning of something instead of the edge of something. He missed her with the particular sharpness that comes when you realize the thing you're grieving isn't just the person. It's the way they made you better at being yourself. He told Becca on a Saturday at the kitchen table, with eggs on the stove the same way it always was. "I'm going to start something new," he said, "my own shop, fixing old machines that other people gave up on." Becca was quiet for a moment. She had a habit of thinking before she spoke that was entirely her mother's and entirely remarkable in a 9-year-old. "Like the loom," she said. "Like the loom." She nodded slowly. "That loom was really loud. It was, but it worked. It did." She looked at her plate. "I think you should do it," she said, in the simple declarative way of someone who has thought the matter through and reached a conclusion. He looked at her for a moment. The morning light came through the kitchen window and caught the side of her face, and she looked so much like her mother that it was almost unbearable, and also, in a way he couldn't fully explain, exactly fine. "Yeah," he said. "I think so too." The sign above the bay door was Becca's idea. She drew it first on a piece of notebook paper, block letters, a little uneven, and then a week later it appeared above the door in proper painted lettering. It said, "We listen first." Vivian had walked past it twice before she stopped and looked at it. "Your daughter?" she asked. "Her idea," Elliot said. Vivian looked at it for another moment. "Smart kid, she is," Elliot said. "She really is." The first machine came in the following Monday, a 1950s grain elevator drive system from a family operation, 2 counties over that 3 service companies had declared beyond economical repair. Elliot put on his work gloves, picked up his flashlight, and crouched down to have a look. He was very still. He listened. Then he got to work.